If a conflict is imposed on us, all United States bases are within our reach, roared Iranian Defense Minister Aziz Nasirzadeh with an undeniable resolve, shaking the region to its core. The statement left global audiences stunned and uncertain. Has the long-standing tension in the Middle East reached a breaking point, or is this just another round of political brinkmanship? Today, we are plunging straight into the heart of this escalating drama to uncover what has truly ignited the latest series of evacuation orders, urgent warnings, and the looming specter of military encounters. Who stands on the brink of conflict? Which alliances are in danger of crumbling? And what behind-the-scenes maneuverings might push this volatile situation over the edge? Join us as we expose the hidden currents swirling beneath the surface of the Middle East, illuminating the simmering hostilities that could shape global affairs for years to come. The tension seemingly spirals around one core question: will the fragile dance of diplomacy give way to open confrontation? Or can world leaders pull back from the brink before irreversible damage is done? In this episode, we will tackle the key points fueling this standoff, from the Trump administration's startling decision to evacuate non-essential personnel from embassies in the region, to the United Kingdom's unusual maritime advisory that is leaving shipping companies on edge. We will delve into the crumbly foundation of the once hopeful Iranian nuclear negotiations, tracing how the seeds of mistrust sprouted anew and threatened to upend any chance of a peaceful accord. And of course, we will not ignore the looming figure of Israel, whose own precarious calculations might be the tipping point that draws multiple nations into a military fray. Nothing grabs attention like the aftershocks of a government order to pack up and go home. That is precisely what happened when the Trump administration, under the impetus of Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, directed non-essential diplomats and families of service members stationed in the Middle East to depart. The official explanation: unnamed security threats stirring in the region. But unnamed threats rarely arise out of thin air. The reason behind this sudden volatility? Rising suspicion that Tehran, emboldened by stalled negotiations and provoked by hawkish rhetoric, might lash out at any moment. Through it all, the stage has been set for a political saga that merges strategic calculations with raw human emotion and fear. The announcements from Washington, particularly the Department of State's message, put it bluntly: if you do not need to be there, get out now. This was coupled with quiet but firm statements that the United States Central Command Area of Responsibility could become a flashpoint. Meanwhile, the United Kingdom Maritime Trade Operations Agency stepped forward with its own cautionary note for vessels in the Arabian Gulf, the Gulf of Oman, and the Strait of Hormuz. Maritime experts warn that these waters, typically brimming with commercial cargo ships, supertankers, and naval patrols, now rest on the cusp of potential confrontation. In an atmosphere charged by dune-shifting alliances and the pounding drums of war, no one dares to guess which move might cause a domino-like collapse into open conflict. At the center of the storm is Tehran's assertion of its right to maintain a civilian enrichment program. Once lauded as the keystone of possible peace, nuclear negotiations between Iran and major world powers had been crawling forward, albeit painfully. Then, the cracks in those fragile conversations seemed to widen. Iran's retort to American and Israeli hawks was blunt. Should the diplomatic path be blocked and military force threatened, Iran would not hesitate to strike back. Suddenly, the region found itself holding its breath. After all, the memory of past confrontations across the Middle East, where entire communities suffered the aftermath, looms large in the collective consciousness. President Trump's ambivalence only poured fuel on the fire. He sounded more pessimistic than ever about the deal, confessing, "I do not know. I am much less confident now than I would have been a couple of months ago." Those words, while not as brazen as an outright threat, held weight. They signaled, possibly, that any diplomatic solution might be on a tenuous thread. If neither nation backs down, where does that leave the carefully balanced scale that has kept a relative calm so far? Presidents, prime ministers, and defense ministers all have a vested interest in the outcome, and public statements swirl with ominous overtones. Could any spark set the entire region ablaze? Israel, for its part, made no secret that it prefers Iran's nuclear ambitions be quelled at almost any cost. Prime Minister Netanyahu, facing both domestic pressures and hawkish factions in his own administration, has long declared that he would never tolerate a nuclear-armed Iran. The Prime Minister's rhetoric soared. Rarely has he hidden his readiness to take aggressive action if necessary. As speculation mounted, rumors began to swirl that Israel might already be planning strikes on Iranian facilities, priming its air force and intelligence apparatus for a bold, decisive operation. But it is not merely talk. Suspicious movements, changes in flight patterns, and cryptic official references combined to stir the pot of speculation, leaving watchers in Washington, Tehran, and beyond to wonder if an unstoppable chain reaction was about to unfold. But here is the twist. President Trump, historically no stranger to tough talk, reportedly phoned Netanyahu with a cautionary message. Do not act hastily. The region, he warned, could descend into chaos far beyond what any single nation might control if Israel decided to take unilateral military action. Following that phone call, unnamed sources hinted that the United States was deeply concerned about being dragged into a regional conflict. Perhaps the memory of prior entanglements, from the wars in Iraq to the ongoing complexities in Syria, weighed heavily on the minds of American officials. They saw that a single miscalculation, fueled by hubris or misinterpretation, could lead to a conflagration, swallowing multiple armies and countless lives. The swirling question remains: is Israel truly ready to launch an operation that could see the entire Middle East explode in a chain reaction? Observers note that the Israeli diplomatic apparatus has not gone silent. Rather, it delineates strict red lines and draws rhetorical boundaries, even as it avoids revealing concrete plans. Israeli defense officials, reticent to publicly confirm strategic details, have nevertheless let slip tidbits that reveal intense planning. Intelligence analysts parse every subtle hint from official statements and cross-reference them with satellite images that might betray suspiciously timed drills or jet mobilizations. Some even speculate that any call for broader evacuations is a sign that the pieces are already in motion. Indeed, a former United States official, speaking off record, suggested that the sudden flurry of embassy closures and calls for families to head home is exactly the kind of measure taken if America believed a strike was on the horizon. After all, do not forget how wars have often erupted in the region after surreptitious buildups, culminating in devastating surprise attacks. Adding weight to these fears, many recall how tensions soared in the past. The environment becomes saturated with rumor and half-truth. Politicians deny any new operation is imminent, while privately racing to finalize war plans. The public is left in the dark, anxiously checking the latest updates in hopes that cooler heads will prevail. But behind the scenes, a quieter drama is unfolding. The intricacies of diplomacy and the personal relationships that either nurture or sabotage peace. Negotiators, even amid the swirl of headlines, continue to work feverishly behind closed doors. Certain European mediators cling to the notion that bridging the gap is still possible. They argue that a deal ensuring Iran's continued but limited nuclear enrichment, under rigorous international verification, might be hammered out if only some stubborn talk on all sides could be toned down. But no one can force the players to sit at the table. Threats about destroying entire nuclear programs are not exactly the comedic prelude to friendly negotiations. The question remains: can trust be rebuilt quickly enough to de-escalate the crisis? If they fail, we may be on the cusp of a scenario no one truly wants. An outbreak of violence that ironically unravels any lingering chance of stability. Remember, the Middle East stands at a crossroads of economic lifelines, from oil production to maritime routes that feed global trade. A major war could devastate more than just the energy market. It could reverberate in everyday products, consumer prices, and the sense of security that many people outside the region take for granted. Think about how quickly the global financial system reacts to conflict. A single missile hitting a tanker can send shockwaves through commodity markets. That interconnectivity may be exactly why the Trump administration, or indeed any administration, would prefer not to wade into an all-out confrontation. In the background, seasoned diplomats in both the United States and Europe worry that a provocation, be it a misfired rocket or an uninvited incursion, could trigger a broader conflagration, forcing governments to choose sides almost overnight. They recall that multiple countries have a stake in the Middle East, from Russia's interests in Syria to Gulf nations' anxieties over Iranian influence. The possibility of multiple major powers taking positions on opposite sides grows if any serious flashpoint emerges. Suddenly, a local feud escalates into a multinational crisis. The ramifications for countries far beyond the immediate vicinity cannot be overstated. Could this be a test of global alliances that rewrites the diplomatic map for the next few decades? Before plunging more deeply into these questions, if this exploration into hidden strategies and precarious alliances has you on tenterhooks, consider supporting this journey by tapping that like button. It might seem trivial, but your engagement spurs us to dig deeper, bringing a spotlight to the murky dealings that shape our world. So, if you are caught in the thick of the drama and want to see beyond the surface of headlines, Let us know with a simple click. Now, back to the unfolding saga. Consider the vantage points of average citizens in these potential flash zones. American soldiers and their families, stationed in foreign lands, suddenly face the reality of an urgent departure. Diplomatic staff must weigh whether to keep essential personnel on site to maintain crucial channels of communication or to drastically slim down the team. Meanwhile, local hosts watch from across fence lines as convoys roll out, green-lit by urgent cables from the West. Anxiety flutters through communities reliant on foreign presence for economic activity. The rest of the local population, seeing these signals, wonders, what do Washington and London know that they are not telling the public? For the Iranians themselves, the story is rife with resentment, pride, and fear. Many defend their government's insistence on preserving some measure of nuclear capability as a sovereign right, echoing slogans of technological independence and national dignity. Others, weary from years of economic strain and isolation, clamor for compromise if it means an end to crippling sanctions and the threat of further devastation. They read headlines about rumored Israeli attacks with alarm and wonder, whether downtown Tehran or remote desert facilities might soon become prime targets. The tension compounds with every statement uttered by a foreign leader who casts their homeland as a looming villain to be conquered. And then there is the perspective of Israel, a country perpetually haunted by memories of existential threats, shaped by generations of conflict and fiercely protective of its security. For Israeli leaders, the prospect of a nuclear-armed adversary sitting across a narrow stretch of desert sparks intense alarms. They worry that political solutions might collapse under the weight of ideological intransigence, and that waiting too long to neutralize a strategic danger could, in retrospect, prove a disastrous error. Even so, the cost of carrying out preventive strikes is high, not only the risk of immediate retaliation, but also the potential strain on alliances if an attack is perceived as reckless. For the Israeli public, the threat never feels distant, as these scenarios can strike close to home in an instant. The question haunting analysts around the globe is simple yet thunderous. Will these tensions remain in the realm of threats and counter-threats, or are they about to erupt into real violence? We have seen so many high-stakes standoffs in the past. However, the swirling rumors around urgent evacuations seem louder this time. The scuttling of peace talks, the sudden pronouncements by Defense Minister Aziz Nasirzadeh, the hush-hush phone calls between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu, each development dangles the possibility that a final fuse might be lit. Warnings about shipping lanes, once thought to be customary caution, now feel uncomfortably pointed, as if hinting at an anomaly hidden just beneath the water's surface. Of course, some argue that these maneuvers form part of a strategic dance, where each side rattles sabers to secure a more favorable position at the negotiation table. In this school of thought, none of the major players actually wants a devastating conflict. They merely want to avoid being perceived as weak. Evacuations, maritime advisories, and strong rhetoric thus become pieces on an elaborate chessboard, aimed at bluffing opponents into concessions. Yet, the margin for error is razor thin. When multiple actors engage in brinkmanship, the risk of misinterpretation skyrockets. One side's attempt to intimidate can easily be read as a precursor to real aggression, prompting the other side to strike first. Inside official circles in Washington, the frantic pace of internal communications raises eyebrows. Some staffers quietly voice concern that the Trump administration has amplified the crisis, either deliberately to pressure Tehran or inadvertently by sending mixed signals. Meanwhile, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth's public confirmations about voluntary departures reflect a scenario no longer confined to speculation. Security advisors eye intelligence data, watch for Iranian ballistic missile tests, track Israeli aerial exercises, and wonder whether they are witnessing the calm before a storm. If the diplomatic track collapses entirely, calls from allies may amplify, urging the United States to intervene decisively or face a region spiraling into chaos. That chaos scenario would have deep implications for the global economy. The Middle East is a crucial artery for the export of energy resources, and any major conflict could send oil prices surging, disrupt global markets, and put shipping routes at grave risk. Not to mention the humanitarian toll. Missile strikes or widespread aerial bombings have historically left families displaced, infrastructures blasted to rubble, and legacies of anger simmering long after the smoke clears. If the world learned anything from previous conflicts in the region, it is that no one emerges unscathed. Even the mightiest armies find themselves entangled in decades of rebuilding efforts, with peace negotiations overshadowed by endless cycles of reprisals. Yet, amid all these uncertain cross-currents, glimmers of hope linger. Some experts believe that, despite the cycle of threats, cooler heads on all sides will ultimately recognize the catastrophic risks of open war. There are still mediators working tirelessly behind the curtains, championing dialogue and compromise. High-level envoys shuttle between capitals, taking the pulse of political leaders and delivering messages crafted to soothe tempers. Rumors swirl of behind-the-scenes phone calls, carefully phrased to test whether a diplomatic miracle might materialize even at this late hour. But time is short, and every misstep on the global stage can unravel the best-laid plans. If you have held your breath through this saga, consider subscribing for future deep dives into these global tensions. In a world so precarious, staying informed is our best shield.